Chapter 31. The projection room at 𝘈𝘕𝘬𝘬𝘬𝘕 was small, 5 rows of folding chairs with an aisle in the middle. 𝘠𝘲𝘻 arrived late. He stood at the back with his arms folded while they screened gray cards, color cards, and cubes variously lighted, filmed on a variety of infrared emulations. His presence disturbed Dandridge, the young man in charge. 𝘠𝘻 carried an air of authority at work. He was the recognized darkroom expert from the parent company next door, and he was known to be a perfectionist. Dandridge had not consulted him in months, a petty rivalry that had gone on since Gateway bought Badir Chemical.
Reba, give us the development dope on sample 8,
Dandridge said. Reba McLean sat at the end of a row, a clipboard in her lap. Speaking in a clear voice, her fingers moving over the clipboard in the semi-darkness, she outlined the mechanics of the development, chemicals, temperature and time, and storage procedures before and after filming. Infrared sensitive film must be handled in total darkness. She had done all the darkroom work, keeping the many samples straight by touch code and keeping a running record in the dark. It was easy to see her value to Badir. The screening ran through quitting time. Reba McLean kept her seat as the others were filing out. 𝘠𝘻 approached her carefully. He spoke to her at a distance, while there were others in the room. He didn't want her to feel watched. "I thought you hadn't made it," she said.
I had a machine down. It made me late.
The lights were on. Her clean scalp glistened in the part of her hair as he stood over her. "Did you get to see the 1000C sample?"
I did.
"They said it looked all right. It's a lot easier to handle than the 1200 series. Think it'll do?"
It will.
She had her purse with her and a light raincoat. He stood back when she came into the aisle behind her searching cane. She didn't seem to expect any help. He didn't offer any. Dandridge stuck his head back into the room.
"Reba, dear, Marcia had to fly. Can you manage?"
Spots of color appeared in her cheeks. "I can manage very well, thank you, Danny."
"I'd drop you, love, but I'm already late. Say, Mr. 𝘠𝘻, if it wouldn't be too much trouble, could you—"
"Danny, I have a ride home." She held in her anger. The nuisances of expression were denied her, so she kept her face relaxed. She couldn't control her color, though. Watching with his cold yellow eyes, 𝘠𝘻 understood her anger perfectly. He knew that Dandridge's limp sympathy felt like a spit on her cheek.
"I'll take you," he said, rather late.
"No, but thank you." She had thought he might offer and had intended to accept. She wouldn't have anybody forced into it. Damn Dandridge. Damn his fumbling. She'd ride the damned bus, damn it. She had the fare, and she knew the way, and she could go anywhere she fucking pleased. She stayed in the women's room long enough for the others to leave the building. The janitor let her out. She followed the edge of a dividing strip across the parking lot toward the bus stop, her raincoat over her shoulders, tapping the edge with her cane and feeling for the slight resistance of the puddles when the cane swished through them. 𝘠𝘲𝘪𝘵 watched her from his van. His feelings made him uneasy. They were dangerous in daylight. For a moment, under the lowering sun, windshields, puddles, high steel wires splintered the sunlight into the glint of scissors. Her white cane comforted him. It swept the light off scissors, swept scissors away. The memory of her harmlessness eased him. He was starting the engine. Reba McLean heard the van behind her. It was beside her now. "Thank you for inviting me." She nodded, smiled, tapped along. "Ride with me." "Thanks, but I take the bus all the time." "Dandridge is a fool. Ride with me." What would someone say? "For my pleasure." She stopped. She heard him get out of the van. People usually grasp her upper arm, not knowing what else to do. Blind people do not like to have their balance disturbed by a firm hold on their triceps. It is as unpleasant for them as standing on wiggly scales to weigh. Like anyone else, they don't like to be propelled. He didn't touch her. In a moment, she said, "It's better if I take your arm." She had wide experience of forearms, but his surprised her fingers. It was as hard as an oak banister. She could not know the amount of nerve he summoned to let her touch him. The van felt big and high. Surrounded by resonances and echoes, unlike those of a car, she held to the edges of the bucket seat until 𝘠𝘲𝘪𝘵 fastened her safety belt. The diagonal shoulder belt pressed one of her breasts. She moved it until it lay between them. They said little during the drive. Waiting at the red lights, he could look at her. She lived in the left side of a duplex on a quiet street near Washington University. "Come in and I'll give you a drink." In his life, 𝘠𝘲𝘪𝘵 had been in fewer than a dozen private homes. In the past 10 years, he had been in 4. His own, Elaine's briefly, the Leeds, and the Jacobys. Other people's houses were exotic to him. She felt the van rock as he got out. Her door opened. It was a long step down the van. She bumped into him lightly. It was like bumping into a tree. He was much heavier, more solid than she would have judged from his voice and footfalls, solid and light on his feet. She had known a Bronco linebacker once in Denver who came out to film a United Way appeal with some blind kids. Once inside her front door, Reba McLean stood her cane in the corner and was suddenly free. She moved effortlessly, turned on music, hanging up her coat. Dollarhide had to reassure himself that she was blind. Being in a home excited him. How about a gin and tonic?
Tonic will be fine.
Would you rather have juice?
Tonic.
You're not a drinker, are you?
No.
Come on in the kitchen.
She opened the refrigerator.
How about... She made a quick inventory with her hands. A piece of pie, then. Cairo pecan, it's dynamite.
Fine.
She took a whole pie from the icebox and put it on the counter. Hands pointing straight down, she spread her fingers along the edge of the pie tin until its circumference told her that her middle fingers were at 9 and 3 o'clock. Then she touched her thumb tips together and brought them down to the surface of the pie to locate its exact center. She marked the center with a toothpick. Dollarhide tried to make conversation to keep her from feeling his stare.
How long have you been at 𝘵𝘰𝘬𝘕?
No S's in that one. 3 months. Didn't you know?
They tell me the minimum.
She grinned. You probably stepped on some toes when you laid out the dark rooms. Listen, the techs love you for it. The plumbing works, and there are plenty of outlets. 220 wherever you need it. She put the thumb finger of her left hand on the toothpick, her thumb on the edge of the tin, and cut him a slice of pie, guiding the knife with her left index finger. He watched her handle the bright knife. Strange to look at the front of a woman as much as he liked. How often in company can one look where he wants to look? She made herself a stiff gin and tonic, and they went into the living room. She passed her hand over a floor lamp, felt no heat, switched it on. Dollarhide ate his pie in 3 bites and sat stiffly on the couch, his sleek hair shining under the lamp, his powerful hands on his knees. She put her head back in the chair and propped her feet on an ottoman. When will they film at the zoo?
Maybe in a week.
He was glad he had called the zoo and offered the infrared film. Dandridge might check. It's a great zoo. I went with my sister and my niece when they came to help me move in. They have the contact area, you know. I hugged the llama. It felt nice, but talk about aroma, boy. I thought I was being followed by a llama until I changed my shirt. This was having a conversation. He had to say something or leave.
How did you come to 𝘵𝘰𝘬𝘕?
They advertised at the Riker Institute in Denver, where I was working. I was checking the bulletin board one day and just happened to come across this job. Actually, what happened? 𝘵𝘰𝘬𝘕 had to shape up their employment practices to keep this defense contract. They managed to pack 6 women, 2 blacks, 2 Chicanos, an Oriental, a paraplegic, and me into a total of 8 hirings. We all counted in at least 2 categories, you see.
You worked out well for 𝘰𝘰𝘬𝘵.
The others did too. 𝘰𝘰𝘬𝘵 is not giving anything away.
Before what?
He was sweating a little. Conversation was hard. Looking was good, though. She had good legs. She had nicked an ankle shaving. Among his arms, a sense of weight of her legs, limp. I trained newly blind people at the Riker Institute in Denver for 10 years after I finished school. This is my first job on the outside.
Outside of what?
Out in the big world. It was really insular at Riker. I mean, we were training people to live in the sighted world, and we didn't live in it ourselves. We talked to each other too much. I thought I'd get out and knock around a little. Actually, I had intended to go into speech therapy for speech and hearing impaired children. I expect I'll go back to that one of these days. She drained her glass. Say, I've got some Mrs. Paul's �々𝘗𝘁𝘕 miniatures in here. They're pretty good. I shouldn't have served dessert first. Want some?
Mm-hmm.
Do you cook?
Mm-hmm.
A tiny crease appeared in her forehead. She went into the kitchen. How about coffee? She called.
Uh-huh.
She made small talk about grocery prices and got no reply. She came back into the living room and sat on the ottoman. Her knees are occupied by her elbows. Let's talk about something for a minute and get it out of the way, okay? Silence. You haven't said anything lately. In fact, you haven't said anything since I mentioned speech therapy. Her voice was kind, but firm. It carried no taint of sympathy. I understand you fine because you speak very well and because I listen. People don't pay attention. They ask me, what, all the time. If you don't want to talk, okay, but I hope you will talk, because you can, and I'm interested in what you have to say.
That's good,
𝘰𝘰𝘬𝘵 said softly. Clearly, this little speech was very important to her. Was she inviting him into the 2-category club with her in the Chinese paraplegic? He wondered what his second category was. Her next statement was incredible to him. May I touch your face? I want to know if you're smiling or frowning. Wearily now. I want to know whether to just shut up or not. She raised her hand and waited. How well would she get around with fingers bitten off? 𝘰𝘰𝘬𝘵 mused. Even in street teeth, he could do it as easily as biting off breadsticks. If he braced his heels on the floor, his weight back on the couch, and locked both hands on her wrists, she could never pull away from him in time. Crunch, 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 crunch. Leave the thumb, maybe, for measuring pies. He took her wrist between his thumb and forefinger and turned her shapely, hard-used hand in the light. There were many small scars on it, and several nicks and aberrations. A smooth scar on the back might have been a burn. Too close to home, too early in his becoming. She wouldn't be there to look anymore. To ask this incredible thing, she could know nothing personal about him. She had not gossiped. Take my word that I'm smiling, he said, okay on the S. It was true that he had a sort of smile which exposed his handsome public teeth. He held her wrist above her lap and released it. Her hand settled to her thigh and half closed, fingers trailing on the cloth like an averted gaze. I think the coffee's ready, she said. I'm going. Had to go. Home for relief. She nodded. If I offended you, I didn't mean to. No. She stayed on the ottoman, listened to be sure the lock clicked as he left. 𝘰𝘂𝘕 made herself another gin and tonic. She put on some 𝘚𝘩𝘰𝘮𝘐 records and curled up on the couch. 𝘰𝘻𝘅𝑗𝑗 had left a warm dent in the cushion. Traces of him remained in the air. Shoe polish, a new leather belt, good shaving lotion. What an intensively private man. She had heard only a few references to him at the office. Dandridge saying, "That son of a bitch 𝘰𝘻𝘅𝑗𝑗," to one of his toadies. Privacy was important to 𝘰𝑗𝑗. As a child, learning to cope after she lost her sight, she had no privacy at all. Now, in public, she could never be sure that she was not watched. So, Francis 𝘰𝘻𝑗𝑗's sense of privacy appealed to her. She had not left one aeon of sympathy from him, and that was good. So was the gin. Suddenly, the Segovias sounded busy. She put on her whale songs. 3 tough months in a new town, the winter to face, finding curbs in the snow. 𝘰𝘂𝘕, leggy and brave, damned self-pity. She would not have it. She was aware of a deep vein of cripple's anger in her, and, while she could not get rid of it, she made it work for her, fueling her drive for independence, strengthening her determination to wring all she could from every day. In her way, she was a hard one. Faith in any sort of natural justice was nothing but a nightlight. She knew that. Whatever she did, she would end the same way everyone does, flat on her back with a tube in her nose, wondering, is that all? She never knew that she would have the light, but there were things she could have. There were things to enjoy. She had gotten pleasure from helping her students, and the pleasure was oddly intensified by the knowledge that she would never be rewarded nor punished for helping them. In making friends, she was very weary of people who fostered dependency and fed on it. She had been involved with a few. The blind attract them, and they are the enemy. Involved. 𝘰𝑗𝑗 knew that she was physically attracted and attractive to men. God knows enough of them copped to feel with their knuckles when they grabbed her upper arm. She liked sex very much, but years ago she had learned something basic about men. Most of them are terrified of entailing a burden. Their fear was augmented in her case. She did not like for a man to creep in and out of her bed as though he were stealing chickens. Ralph Mandy was coming to take her to dinner. He had a particularly cowardly mew about being so scared by life that he was incapable of love. Careful Ralph told her that too often, and it scalded her. Ralph was amusing, but she didn't want to own him. She didn't want to see Ralph. She didn't feel like making conversation and hearing the hitches and conversations around them as people watched her eat. It'd be so nice to be wanted by someone with the courage to get his hat or stay as he damn pleased, and who gave her credit for the same. Someone who didn't worry about her. Frances Dollarhide, shy, with a linebacker's body, and no bullshit. She had never seen or touched a cleft lip, and had no visual associations with the sound. She wondered if Dollarhide thought she understood him easily because blind people hear so much better than we do. That's the common myth. Maybe she should have explained to him that it was not true, that blind people simply pay more attention to what they hear. There were so many misconceptions about the blind. She wondered if Dollarhide shared the popular belief that the blind are purer in spirit than most people, that they are somehow sanctified by their affliction. She smiled to herself. That one wasn't true either.